So continuing on with our little utility helper, in this video, Nelson is going to implement that little application. Nelson.
Yes, so we're going to build a little console app that will sit at the root of a project directory. And when we launch it, we want it to scan all of the subdirectories and find .g and .g3 files, which are both valid ANTLR3 extensions.
Wait, G and G3.
Yes, G and
Okay.
G3. And then it's going to basically sit there, watch that file for changes, and every time the file changes, it's going to go ahead and execute ANTLR against those files. So I'm going to fire up a new project. It's just going to be a console application. It's not going to be very long or very complex. I'm going to call it ANTLR Builder. Wait a year. Nuke out our usings, nuke out our args, and start on main. Alrighty, now the first thing we need to do is actually find where ANTLR is. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to establish a convention at this point. And that convention is that ANTLR is going to be placed under a folder called a lib underneath our solution. So let me show you what I mean. I have this workspace up from the last video, and I have this ANTLR distribution right here. Then I also have a lot of projects open. I think it's this one. Let's hope it's this one. I have this project here, which is what we're going to want to be using for testing our application. So I'm going to go ahead and quote install ANTLR unquote into this project. I'm going to start by opening up an Explorer and jumping into the solution folder. I'm going to create a folder called lib. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab our ANTLR distribution and copy it over. Then I'm going to rename it ANTLR3. So at this point, you should have a folder called lib underneath your solution that opens up into ANTLR-3, which has all this awesome ANTLR stuff. I'm also going to go ahead and take basic.json.g, and I'm going to dump it into Visual Studio over here. So now we have basic.json.g, basic.json lexer, and basic.json parser. Our goal is, at the end of this video, we should have a console application that will sit in the background, and every time we update this file, we'll update these two files for us, recompile them through ANTLR.
Nice.
So let's find this, and let's go ahead and establish the ANTLR directory. That's going to be the first step. The first step is to figure out what ANTLR executable are we going to use. And yeah. So remember, we're going to be executing this application from the root of the solution. And that means that per the convention that I just established, there's going to be a lib folder. Underneath that lib folder, there's probably going to be an ANTLR3.exe. So the first step is I'm going to say var ANTLR directory, ANTLR directory equals establish ANTLR directory. I'm going to generate this method, and it's not going to return void, it's going to return a string. And what's this method going to do? It's going to go ahead and say, it's first going to figure out the lib path, which is going to be with a vat. Yes. We'll start with a vat. We're going to go ahead and combine our base directory, which is at this point is going to be app domain current domain base directory. And it's going to combine that with the word lib. And then we're going to say return directory.exists lib. Because remember, the directory lib might not exist, in which case we don't want to have our program crash. And then we'll say directory.enumerate files lib path, or sorry, just lib. Then pass in the path or the pattern star.exe, and then do search options all directories. And then maybe it'll look a little bit nicer if we break it out like that. And then we're going to say first or default with file path get file name file equals ANTLR3.exe. Otherwise, return null. Okay, so what does this method do? It first aliases out a variable called lib that's going to point to an absolute directory where our lib folder should be. Then it's going to check to see if the directory exists. If it does, it's going to enumerate all of the files recursively that end in exe, and it's going to select out the first one that matches ANTLR3.executable, or it's going to return null if it can't find one, and then it's going to return null if the directory itself doesn't exist. So now we can simply say, if ANTLR directory is null, console.writeLine cannot find ANTLR exe in lib folder, press any key to exist. Wow. Getting a little philosophical here. Read key true. Return. Okay. So now we have a nice little sanity check right there. At this point, we now are pointing to, or we have established where ANTLR lives. So what's the next step? The next step is that we need to scan the entire folder structure up to here and find all .g and .g3 files. And what we're going to do here is we're going to write a little method that's going to scan all those files and turn them into what are called file watchers. Because this is a really simple program, I'm going to go ahead and just write a private static list of file system watchers. And I'm going to call it watchers. Okay, so now we have this list of file system watchers. What are file system watchers? Well, file system watchers are classes that we can use to watch the file system. It'll give us this nice little, for example, changed event, which we're going to be focusing on, that'll allow us to write logic that will be executed whenever the file system watcher detects a change. So how do we use it? Well, first I'm going to go ahead and run another method called scan current folder, just to keep things pretty clean here. Dump it down there. Scan current folder is basically going to do the same thing as our other method, except for it's going to find all .g or .g3 files, and then it's going to create file watchers for them. So the first thing I'm going to do is I plan on using this method more than one time. So every time you invoke it, I'm going to say for each var watcher in watchers, watcher.dispose, and then finally watchers.clear. So this will go ahead and destroy all the watchers that are currently created. Then I'm going to say for each var file in directory.enumerate files. Now we're going to pass in our current directory again. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually turn this into a private field. And the reason is because we're going to be reusing it twice now. I want to be able to change this to manually set the directory we're going to be working under for the case or for testing purposes. So I'm going to hit Control-Shift-R. I'm going to say introduce field. I want to introduce and initialize in field initializer, and I want to make it read-only. Hit Enter. Now we have, instead of that code, we have a base directory field, which you can see right up here. So now we can say enumerate files in base directory. Go ahead and give it a just a search pattern of everything, and then say all directories. And what are we going to do in here? First thing we're going to do is going to get the extension. So path.getExtension for the file. And we're going to say if ext does not equal .g and ext does not equal .g3, then continue because we're not worried about this file. Of course, I'm actually not going to use the not equals operator. Instead, I'm going to use if not ext.equals.g invariant culture ignore case, and not ext equals .g3 invariant culture ignore case. So in this case, I'm doing an invariant culture case insensitive comparison between the file name and what we have expected here. Then finally, I'm going to say watchers.add, and I'm going to write another method just to make things clean and straightforward called watch. I'm going to pass in the file. So I'm going to generate this method, and you see ReSharper properly generated it as a private static method that returns a file system watcher and takes in a string called file. So what's this watch method going to do? It's just going to instantiate a file system watcher and return it. So pretty straightforward. I'm also going to go ahead and say console.writeLine watching 0, and that's going to point to path.getFileName file so that we get a little feedback as to what we're actually watching here. Now I'm going to say var watcher equals new file system watcher. I'm going to pass in path.getDirectoryName for the file. And as the filter, I'm going to pass in path.getFileName file. So we're creating a watcher for every file, and we're setting the watcher's filter to the file name that we're wanting to watch. Then I'm going to go ahead and say notify filter is going to be notify filters.lastWrite. So it'll be notified when the last write attribute changes on the file system. Now here's a little funky part. We're going to have to go ahead and say watcher.changed, and we're going to have to pass in a delegate that represents what we want to happen when we change the file. Now basically what it's going to do is it's going to say recompile file. And recompile file is going to be a method that we write that actually invokes ANTLR. This will not work the way you expect it to, and the reason it won't work the way you expect it to is that the way the file system watcher is currently configured, you will get 2 change notifications every time the file is changed, which becomes annoying. So instead, I'm going to make a var skip false. It's very important that I put this outside of the scope of the Lambda. And then I'm going to simply say if it's not time to skip, then go ahead and recompile, and then flip the skip bit. So finally, I'm going to say watcher.enable raising events to turn the file watcher on, and I'm going to return it out. Good so far?
Mm-hmm.
Now finally, the recompile method. So the recompile method is where we're actually going to be doing the work of recompiling, per the name, of course. So I'm going to say console.writeLine just to get some nice little output. I'll say that file changed, and I'm going to say path.getFileName file. Then I'm going to go ahead and say if not file.exists. Now we have the ANTLR directory that is actually stored as a private variable right now. But what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to turn our ANTLR directory into a field again. So that's Control-Shift-R, introduce field, Alt-F, Alt-R, enter. And ReSharper magically gave us this private static read-only static or string ANTLR directory. And then it wants us to rename them, these two methods or these two fields as well. Okay, so now that we have our ANTLR directory refactored into a private field, I'm going to go ahead and say, well, first of all, I'm actually going to rename this. Why did I call this ANTLR directory?
Got me.
Why did you let me call this ANTLR directory?
I just assumed you knew what you were doing.
You can never assume this.
I've got to be able to assume that.
This is actually the ANTLR exe path. Okay, so now that we've successfully renamed this to ANTLR exe path and this method to establish ANTLR exe path, now this code will make a little bit more sense. So I'm going to start off with a little sanity check, just so I don't get any nasty exceptions. Now there is a race condition where if after this check someone deletes the ANTLR executable before I actually invoke it, I'm not too concerned about that, but I am slightly concerned that maybe something is going to happen where ANTLR is destroyed, my program crashes, and I don't like my programs crashing. So I'm going to say if not file exists ANTLR exe path, I'm going to crash it manually with my own message. But at least it's more semantic. So then I'm going to go ahead and say var output folder is going to equal path.combine path get directory name of file, comma, underscore generated. I'm simply saying the output folder for our code is going to be in a subdirectory called generated. Then I'm going to say if not directory exists output folder. Well, directory.create output folder. That shouldn't need much explaining. Finally, I'm going to do a process config. And process config is going to store a bunch of, or is going to represent what we want to launch. In this case, it's the ANTLR executable with some particular arguments. So I'm going to say file name equals ANTLR exe path. I'm going to say arguments equals -o for -output, 0, 1. And then furthermore, I'm going to wrap these in double quotes. And then say output folder and file. So what's this telling ANTLR? This is telling ANTLR to output into this folder and to compile this file. So straightforward so far. I'm going to say redirect standard input equals true and use shall execute equals false. We need to do that in order to actually get the input from the process and show it in our own console window, which is what we want. So I'm going to say using var proc equals process.start. So we're going to actually start the process now. Pass in our process config. Then I'm going to say var using sr equals proc.standard output because we actually went ahead and redirected it. We have access to the standard output, but the standard output is actually already going to print out to the console. But what we want to do is we want to read to end with the standard output so that we block processing on this thread until ANTLR is done. Because the last thing we're going to do is say write line compiled. So good so far.
Mm-hmm.
Finally, putting this all together back in main, now that we've scanned our current folder, we can go ahead and say, I do want kind of a nice little UI for this, or not UI, but a little console interface. I'm going to say while input equals console.read key, true.key char does not equal q, if input does not equal r, continue, scan current folder, and then washers.clear. So what does this do? This is going to simply halt execution on our thread until we type in a key. And it's only going to respond to one or two keys. It's going to respond to Q, which will end up closing the program. And it's going to respond to R, which will refresh or rescan the directory structure for ANTLR files. So, no idea if this is going to run or not, but let's check it out.
Way to have faith there.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to open up this in Windows Explorer. I'm going to copy the path, and I'm going to actually kind of cheat. Well, you know what I can do? I can do this. Yay. Okay, and then I'm going to say our base directory is now going to be that. So basically what I did was I manually set our base directory to the location of our other project. And remember, that base directory has to be in the solution, not the project. Alrighty, so now what happens when I run this program? Hey. Do you see that?
Yeah, found your G file. It's watching it.
See that? What happens if we add in an enter? Oh. Aww.
Oh, is that an explosion?
That was an explosion. That was a big explosion. Let's control F5 this so we get a pause at the end of it so we can actually read what happened. Standard out has not been redirected. The process hasn't started yet. Well, apparently the process hasn't started yet. And honestly, I thought I started the process. I pretty explicitly started the process. I mean, you can't, unless they're lying about what that method does, which, you know, isn't beyond Microsoft. Let's go ahead and make sure that our ANTLR executable path is correct. Where are you? You're here. Are you correct? I think you are. I'm pretty sure you are, actually. Yeah, that's probably correct. Yeah, that's correct. Well, this is kind of bad. Let's figure out why this is happening. Ooh, typo. How'd you not... See, this is supposed to be more like pair programming, Jason. Come on.
Oh, is
Come
it?
on. Look at that. I'm redirecting the standard input, not the standard output.
It looks like the input's spelled right. You should be using a different word.
I should be using a different word, and the different word I'm going to be using now is output.
I thought it would be excellent for them to see. You notice how I didn't offer to pause the video. This is excellent stuff for them to see. They follow you. You lead them down the wrong road. Then you show them how to get back.
Right. Well, let's launch this stupid program again.
It's not a stupid program.
I'm going to delete my Alexa and parser CS files from this because pretty soon here, they're going to be generated for us. I'm going to make a change to our file, hit Control S. So what happened? Let's look over here in our Solution Explorer. Let's hit the Show All Files button. Oh, you see that?
Hey.
And we have our token CS and CS files.
Nice.
So now if I right-click this and say Include in Project, we now have these generated files. So just to verify, I'll go ahead and maximize this. If I were to change some of my code again, hit Control S, in a few seconds I'll get, Visual Studio, because I have this file open already. Visual Studio will detect that this file has been changed. So now we can continue to pretty much code along as much as I want. So I can say console write line, this is number. And I can hit Control S, and then I can hit Control 5, and guess what we get?
Nice.
And we can stick this wherever we need to, like on a different monitor or whatever, just to monitor things as they happen. Because what happens if we have syntax errors? For example, if I was missing the semi and hit Control S, we'll get a nice little stack trace. Actually, this is not a nice error message. Oh, well, there we go. Basic JSON 13.8. So, yeah.
Very cool. That's going to make life a lot easier.
Yep. And remember, just to make this program actually be usable in more than just my computer on this one project, bring back the app domain current domain base directory. Let's go ahead and switch our config manager over to a release build. Control-Shift-B, open up our Solution Explorer, open this up in Windows Explorer. Now I'm going to minimize this. I'm going to go into bin release ANTLR builder.exe. I'm going to open up our solution in Windows Explorer. I'm going to dump ANTLR builder right there, and I'm going to double click on it. And now we have a tool that's running.
Awesome. Fantastic. All right, so that's pretty much everything that you wanted to cover here, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, well, with that, ladies and gentlemen, that will wrap up this video. Thanks a lot.